Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Don Knabe. He's a member of the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles County. And sir, I recently read an article in the Sacramento Bee by Dan Walters. And the title is, Giant Los Angeles County Needs More Supervisors. And so if anyone could talk about the topic, it would be you. You worked for a supervisor for several years before you were elected.
Right.
And so I want to set some parameters, if I may. Indulge me, please. So LA County has about 10 million people. If LA County were a state, it would be number 8 in the nation, below Ohio, above Georgia. There are 5 supervisors. Each supervisor represents 2 million people. If each district were a state, each district would be number 37 in terms of states, below New Mexico, above Nebraska. One could argue that maybe we need more representation in LA County on the Board of Supervisors, more numbers.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you know those facts. I mean, I say those all the time. I mean, people have no idea how big the numbers are.
Right.
I think that the situation, to put it in a bigger perspective, while there's 10 million residents and 10 million constituents, if we didn't have the cities, we have 88 cities, of which the city of Los Angeles is the largest, Long Beach the second largest, Torrance the third, and so on down the line, that have mayors and city councils that govern their cities. The big difference is the health care, welfare kinds of issues, public health, all those kinds of issues that really cities don't want to deal with. So,
and they are really not expected to deal with, because if you look at the way our government is structured in California, cities are really not an arm of the state. Counties are.
Right.
And so any funding, it's an exaggeration, but virtually all funding that comes from the feds or the state flow through the county. Flow
through the county. We, like I say, of our $26 billion budget, about 95% of it are mandates that are passed through. The problem is they don't always reimburse 100% like they say they're going to do. But I mean, the bigger issue here is I tell people have asked me for more libraries, more police, more parks, more firemen, more this, more that, dog parks, but no one has ever asked me for more politicians.
And let's bring this up, because you make a very good point. The voters of LA County have been asked 3 times.
3 times.
To expand the board. 1976, 1992, and 2000. Never was the election close. Every time that proposal went down to a resounding defeat.
Absolutely.
Despite the fact that good government groups were behind these proposals. I'm wondering.
But I think good government groups in many cases, and all due respect to them, are theoretical or academias versus the reality. The reality is the great thing, and you've heard me say this many times on this show, the great thing about my job is I don't have to get involved in partisan politics.
Well,
my district
nonpartisan offices, right?
Nonpartisan, but my district is so big that I have to think on a regional scope versus a small little area. I have to be concerned about the port traffic coming out of Long Beach and Los Angeles as I do the junctures of the 10, 16, 57 freeway.
But then couldn't one argue, because you're literally the supervisor for a state, I mean, essentially the 37th largest state, that you can't pay attention to the details that may need attention. I mean, you think about Alpine County, for example. Mr. Walters talked about it. 1,200 residents, 5 supervisors.
Exactly.
LA County, 5 supervisors, 10 million residents.
Okay. And as an example, I mean, when I was on the Homeland Security Commission, a presidential appointment, my district was bigger than some of the governors I worked with.
Right, of course.
But that's neither here nor there. I mean,
think about this. Bill Clinton.
No, my district was bigger than his state.
I think actually Arkansas has 3 or 4 million people, but I think my point is well taken. I mean, the leader of the free world catapulted from a state that was a district and a half.
So do you want to chase like the city and county of Chicago, Cook County, where you have like 50 representatives, or you want to chase 5? It's a very public process. We don't have to chase you. The press doesn't have to chase any more than 5. They don't have to chase 10 or 15.
What about the question, though, if I may? It's a sensitive one, but I must ask it, about the diversity or lack of diversity.
That's the only reason this always comes up, is the fact that the diversity issues of which ethnic groups are represented and whether or not someone like myself can represent the Latinos or the African Americans or the Asians. I mean, whatever it may be, but can an Asian then represent me or an African American or a Latino?
I do really want to dig in on this, because I think there was a time that the perception was only a Latino could represent Latino interests, only an African American could represent African American interests. But those days arguably have passed. I mean, Barack Obama is an African American in a country that's about 13% African American. I think about Chris Holden, for example. You surely know Chris because his father, Chris, very tall, I mean irrelevant, but tall African American, representing lily white Pasadena. I mean, people of different ethnicities are representing majority populations.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, I think, that argument really gets old from time to time, but it always rehashes. And this particular article you're talking about is a result of another article written by Mr. Boyarsky,
Bill Boyarsky,
who's been writing about Los Angeles County for a zillion years. But look at in my district, when we went through reapportionment, they came after me on an ethnic basis, but at the end of the day, whereas I picked up a higher Latino population, that a Latino would have a very good opportunity in my district to win. The second district, Mark Ridley Thomas, the African American, his district is very Latino.
Right.
And so, I mean, you've got these movements of people, but that's not to say that Mark can't represent his district. He picked up Westchester, more white Anglo, than I picked up Santa Fe Spring, which is a very high Latino population.
But there is the issue. The board, I guess we'd say, is 20% Latino. Gloria Molina is a Latina, 1/5 of the board, but the county is almost 60% Latino. And so is it by definition, are the cards stacked against Latino candidates?
Well, I don't think, because when you have 10 million people, you look at the disbursement of the population. That 60% isn't all in one area.
Very true.
Okay, so you really have to gerrymander to pick up, if you want to make it, if you want to hand a particular ethnic group a seat of any, whether it's city council, whether it's board of supervisors, whether it's assembly or senate, you'd really have to pack. And packing a district has been proven unconstitutional by the Supreme Court and by the Department of Justice. So I think
that begs the question, sir. Are we at risk, given what I just described, of another intervention by the Department of Justice? I mean, Mrs. Molina joined the board after the Department of Justice came in.
But you understand that the previous winner of that race was a Latina, just happened to be a Republican Latina. That's the election.
Was it?
Oh, absolutely.
Who was it? I believe you. I just can't remember. It's okay. Well, I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah. And when she won, and
Swan. Was it?
No. She was Latina. She worked for Pisha Barm.
Okay.
I'll think of it here in a second. But I think the point being is that there were gerrymandering going on in the old days, where you just sort of went up a street, Figueroa Boulevard, then you moved over here. That has been thrown out by the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice. And I think if you look at our numbers and the way it's dispersed with upcoming elections, that there's a very fair opportunity. The group that I think eventually will be even greater impacted than Latinos here in Los Angeles County is the Asian American population.
There have been discussions about your district specifically, whether it could be an Asian seat.
Well, if they packed it. The problem is, you've got the Asian population is all over the county.
Right.
So it's very hard.
Pockets. I mean, I think about Monterey Park,
That's not my
Gabriel. District. Is that part of Miss Molina's district?
That's part of Miss Molina's district. Mike has a very big population. I have a very large population in the Diamond Bar area of over Palos Verdes.
I want to ask you about the notion of electing, we'll call it a mayor of LA County.
Well, that's always out for judgment. I'm starting to think, because of our size, going back to the size you talked about, that it might be a good idea at some point, just because I think it gives us a greater strength and a greater voice.
So would it be 4 plus 1?
Than a chairman rotating. Well, it could be 4 plus 1 or 5 plus 1.
6. That's an even number.
Well, so what? You got 5 voting members, and you'd have 1 that was elected countywide.
Almost a veto. Kind of
very similar to Long Beach, but I would hope that unsimilar to Long Beach, that it would have the power to vote and to have input instead of just having to.
It's a fascinating issue, and I am so glad that you were the person I got to speak with.
I just think that maybe the time has come, in the sense that while we rotate as chairman, like I'm the incoming chairman. It becomes an agenda kind of a thing, and it sort of breaks us up to a weaker situation.
He's Don Knabe. I'm Brad Pomerance. You are watching Charter California Edition. We'll be right back.
If Los Angeles ranks as largest county by population in California, what county maintains the second largest population? Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, or San Diego. San Diego County just edges Orange County as the second largest county by population in the Golden State, with approximately 3.1 million residents.
Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Bonnie Lowenthal, member of the California State Assembly, also a candidate for mayor in the city of Long Beach. That election will be held in April 2014. I'd like to speak about your work, though, in the Assembly. You had a successful year. Is it
I did.
12 bills signed?
Yes, it was a baker's dozen.
A baker's dozen, I was going to say.
One of the local journalists.
I want to talk about a few of the bills.
Sure.
One of them fascinates me. As I think you may know, I used to be a lawyer. And so this bill dealt with a loophole in the rape law. It got a lot of press. And what the underlying facts of the case were, do you want to tell?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, just let me say I was appalled when I read the article in the paper,
We
as
all did, yeah.
was everyone. And being the chair of the Women's Caucus, I felt a real responsibility to work toward getting rid of this loophole. And the loophole was an 1890 law that obviously the judges felt bound to follow, that said if a man rapes somebody impersonating the person's husband, then it's considered rape. But impersonating
A boyfriend.
not rape. Not rape.
And that's what this man did.
Yes.
And so the conviction was overturned. And so you worked with Republican Assemblywoman
I worked with Cacho Ashajian, so it was a bipartisan bill, and we got tremendous support from both houses in the legislature. Clearly, it was a priority for the women.
Yet, what's interesting is this is really, in a lot of ways, while there's frustration over that Court of Appeal decision, this is democracy in action.
That's right.
I mean, you had a Court of Appeals decision, and it's the legislature's right to react in accordance with the judiciary, the other branch, and so you wrote a law to fix the situation.
That's
Doesn't help the individual who was the victim in this case, but on a go-forward basis.
Correct. I have to say something, Brad. It reminds me of another bill I passed about 4 years ago, and it was because in the California Code Book, way back in the 50s, there was something that said we have to find the cause and cure of homosexuality.
Excellent.
So that was another
not only the cause, but the cure.
I know. People were astounded, and that was practically unanimous.
I'm sure there's an
in the
injection.
legislature.
I mean, there must be.
Signed by Governor Schwarzenegger, so that was removed from the books.
I'm sure if you went through, actually, I remember a few years back there was a bill in Florida that referenced Shylock.
Oh.
And so they had to fix that, and that was an attack on Jewish Americans. And so I'm sure there are a lot.
We can laugh now, but you
Exactly.
know what? It was a law, and it probably hurt a lot of people.
No doubt. I want to talk about other bills that were passed. I know that you have been working diligently with regard to high-speed rail.
Yes.
Continues to be controversial.
Yes,
but
it
the
is.
bottom line is, Assemblywoman, high-speed rail, I mean, at some level it's here. I mean, if you go to the Central Valley, there is at least a modicum of commencement of construction.
You know, there was an article recently by someone who took his daughter to Sacramento, and they had to leave from Burbank, get on a bus, go over the Tehachapi's, find the train, and it was bus, train, bus, train, bus, train. He said, you know what? Now I'm a believer in high-speed rail. And anybody who's gone to Europe or Asia and has ridden a high-speed rail comes back and says, California needs this.
I have to tell you, I was in Taiwan, and they recently installed a high-speed rail. It was remarkable. But again, not taking a position, I lived in Washington, D.C. Many years ago, and the distance between Washington, D.C. and Providence, Rhode Island, is the same as L.A. to San Francisco. And think how easy it is to get in between Washington, Baltimore, Philly, New York, Boston, Providence because of rail.
Right.
We can't do that in Los
Well,
Angeles.
you know, you
San
mentioned
Francisco.
the Central Valley, which is so important. Part of the reason many folks in Central Valley support this and in the Fresno area is because there's an opportunity for development there. I mean, right now it's very barren. It's our agricultural heaven, which we're happy about.
I mean, it's a salad bowl of America.
Exactly, but you know what? We do need more development, and it'll improve the economy in the Central Valley.
But yet, if you look at polls, there is a skepticism about high-speed rail. Do we have the money for it? Do we have the money for it?
Well, I think that time will tell. I think we're working toward that end. You know, this is one of the governor's pet projects. We're doing everything that we can to make it move forward.
At the same time,
there's a difference
right,
between state money and federal money, and so that's one of the things they're working on now in the courts.
You mentioned federal money, and as I remember, I think the feds allocated about $3.3 billion that must be spent by 2017.
And that's why they're working in the Valley
But
now.
they got to spend fast.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's like $2.5 million a day. I mean, lucky, whoever that contractor is lucky, but can we meet these deadlines?
Oh, I think we can. I think the people in charge of the High-Speed Rail Authority now are the very best people.
Right.
It took some time and some changes to get there, but now we're moving forward at a faster pace.
Another criticism has been that why are we starting in the Central Valley? I mean, God bless our friends in the Central Valley, but, you know, would not be wise. I know we don't have a choice anymore. That's where we are. But why didn't we start in L.A. or San Francisco?
Because you could get your biggest bang for the buck. And what the feds wanted to see was how fast it was able to go.
Shovel ready.
That it would, not just shovel ready, but that it would be up to certain speeds. So it would actually become higher speed rail. Here, or up north at the so-called bookends, you've heard that term, they're much shorter distances, so a train could never reach the speed.
But how do we make sure that this rail isn't just abandoned in the middle because we don't have the funds? That all of a sudden we have a high-speed rail in nowhere.
Yeah, well, we keep on task, and the governor will make sure that happens.
I want to shift gears.
You know, think about it. Think about how many years ago we had the aqueduct and how many people were worried about that. Whenever there's a project of this size, there's always questions.
You are now running for the office of mayor of Long Beach. You had been on the city council, and so long.
And had been vice mayor.
That's right, I remember that. And you left to become a state assemblywoman. You're now back, and you're talking to, I mean, you've always been talking to residents of Long Beach because you still represent Long Beach, but give us a sense of what you're learning. I mean, Long Beach, one of our great cities in the state of California. What are Long Beach residents saying to you?
That's a good question. That's a surprise question,
and it's
Brad.
my pleasure.
And it's
I'm
a
sure
good one because people are talking about a new vision for Long Beach, developing a sense of place. These last 4 years have been so difficult. Everything came to a screeching halt. In a sense, we had to stop dreaming, right?
Well stated.
So this is a time to start the dream again and develop a vision of all the people of Long Beach, to create hubs throughout the city, not just the downtown. Make it easier for business to flourish, make it easier for the arts to flourish. But it's going to take many, many people coming to the table with a vision to put something together.
It's interesting you use the metaphor of a dream, because there's no doubt that we have turned a corner. And often when we turn a corner, politicians, elected officials can start spending, because the money's finally here. And so how do we make sure we don't do what we did in the year 2000, when all of a sudden we just start spending and giving all these concessions to our bargaining partners, and then we're in trouble a few years later?
Funny, I remember way back then I was on the school board, and I remember the state having a surplus of $6 billion, and everybody went after it, and none of it was saved. I think at the city, we've always tried to develop a rainy day fund. We've done that at the state. We had $1 billion surplus this year.
Will it stay around with the prison crisis? But side note,
but we've done it. And so that's what a rainy day fund is. You hope you keep it for the long term, crisis comes, and then you have something available.
So, you know, this city council, we're going to be speaking with James Johnson soon on this episode. And, you know, he expressed, I understand he's going to express some concerns about a recent vote to increase salaries by about 15%. It feels good to do that. But again, it's this whole notion of, should we be giving raises, even though they didn't get a raise, whoever that is, for the last 5 years? How do we kind of rein it in so we do give people what they deserve, but yet not get too
as you know, I wasn't part of the vote.
I know.
So that's something that a mayor is a big part of going forward. The negotiations, treating employees fairly. There have been a lot of employees let go because of the recession.
No doubt.
I think we have to look at city services. We have to look at the infrastructure that's crumbling. Those are big needs. We have to look at public safety.
Her name is Bonnie Lowenthal, candidate for Long Beach mayor, member of the Assembly. When we come back, we'll be speaking with James Johnson, council member and city attorney candidate. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
How many of California's 25 largest cities by population are located in Los Angeles County? 4, 6, 8, or 10? Los Angeles, Long Beach, Glendale, and Santa Clarita are the only cities in Los Angeles County which fall into the top 25 largest cities by population in the Golden State.
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, James Johnson. He's a member of the Long Beach City Council, also a candidate for city attorney. That election will be held in April 2014. And I want to speak with you about the concept of transparency. It's a buzzword that we hear so often in politics. I know one of your colleagues on the council, she's big on having her calendars online as a transparent effort. What's your sense of transparency and its importance?
Well, transparency is important in government, but I think a lot of times people talk about these other kind of calendars and things, but where it really matters is in financial decisions. Because I believe to have an engaged electorate, to have an engaged public, to have an engaged city council, we all need to know the facts upon which we make decisions. And that's why that's so important.
What's interesting about financial decisions is even though we have what's known as the Brown Act, which requires open government, and I've said on the air I have issues with the Brown Act, but that's another conversation. So many financial decisions are actually made in closed session because they deal with personnel or for other reasons. So talk to me about how the Brown Act plays into the question of a desire for transparency.
Well, sometimes, Brad, when you're making decisions such as hiring or firing key personnel or wage increases, you need to have those negotiations behind closed doors.
Right.
Because it's just inappropriate to talk about firing someone in public, for example. So I think there is a time and a place for closed session discussions. And it should be noted that when you make a big financial decision, you do have to go to open session and disclose it.
Okay.
But I think one issue is, when you're in open session, what are the facts?
Right.
For example, if you have a document that everyone's looking at and it says we're giving a raise, but the raise isn't noted, how can people have an informed decision if it's a good or bad idea?
Yeah, so let's talk about what brought this issue to the forefront for you. Over the last 5 years, Long Beach, at least most of its bargaining units, did not see raises in very tough fiscal times like any city in our great state. I believe some of the safety unions saw raises, but most of the bargaining units did not. So some of your bargaining units asked for a raise. After 5 years, we see that the economy is turning around. We see that the fiscal house is in better order in Long Beach and other cities. How is that presented to you, that request?
Well, you know, I should say that over the 5 years there were some raises given out, but really it was from previous contracts. So no new raises given out.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
But you know, raises are tough because on the one hand you want to retain and attract the best and brightest, Brad, and you need to be fair to your employees. But you also need to know where the money is going to come from, what the impact is. So recently the City Council was given some documents, and it basically said we're going to get 5% one year, 4% another year.
Meaning
the City Council would grant, and there would be a pension adjustment. What people didn't understand is really what they were talking about was giving a 15% increase and then having the employees give 6% back. So I think because that wasn't laid out transparently, how could you have an opinion on it when you don't even know what the numbers are?
So how did it come to be that you were aware that the raise was actually not 5 plus 4, but 5 plus 4 plus 6?
Yeah, well, 5 plus 4 plus 6 minus 6, and that's why it's so complicated.
Right.
But what we had talked about in closed session, and I think those numbers looked a little different.
Okay.
And but when it came into the public, I think it was written in a way not to be easily understood. So I had people talk to me and say, James, what is this? What's the raise? What's the net raise? I don't understand what this pension reform is or isn't. And I think we should all be able to disagree on the options, but agree on the facts. And the facts were.
So why does this happen? Why did this happen?
Well, I think some people didn't want to lay out the true situation because they thought that people have certain opinions on it. You know, sometimes you might have sticker shock from a 15% increase. And now, of course, you're going to 6% back. You could say it's only a 9% increase.
But even 9% is high. I mean, 9% is a nice chunk of change. Now, one could argue, but that's 9% without seeing any raises for 5 years.
Well, that's right. And I think, you know, to these employees' credit, they had gone many years without any increases, while other people had gotten increases. But I don't think it's so much the percentage, Brad. It's about let's lay it out for the people to decide. Let's let them come to the city council and say we're for it or against it based on what we know it is.
So was it a failure, if I can use that term, of the current city attorney for not laying it out properly? Was it a failure of the city clerk, the city council? Why was it not laid out properly?
Well, I can't speak for others, but what I can say, if I were a city attorney, I would require all the material terms of a contract to be laid out, Brad. I think it's important when you have a client, and this client here is the city council, you do not let them enter into a contract without fully seeing all the terms, and also I think the public fully seeing all the terms.
So was your sense of the situation that the city council had a sense because you were in closed session and it was explained to you, but once it went to open session, this document is laid out and you really had to play detective?
Yeah, that's right, and more importantly, the people had to play detective. And more, even bigger than that, Brad, is that one issue here is there was a conflict of interest.
Okay, which is a separate issue. So let's
Right.
talk about that because it's separate from the question of the financial figures. Ultimately, I want to talk about the conflict. The raise was passed. Where did you come down?
Well, I did not support it because I thought there were some questions that weren't answered. Where's the money going to come from? How do we get to this number? I would have liked to see more discussion and a more robust discussion.
Okay.
What's the trade-off? You know, it's hard to say, is 9% a good number in a vacuum? You
Right.
need to know where's money coming from, what are we giving up, what are the comparable salaries in the field. So I didn't think we did enough discussion, frankly. But also, like I said, I was really disturbed by the process, the fact that I don't think the numbers were transparent to the people. I didn't think the conflict
So let's talk about the conflict. Why do you believe, and as you know, I used to be a lawyer, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and so I have a little sense of conflict of interest laws. For our viewers, give us a sense why you believe there was a conflict and how it presented.
Well, there's a conflict because the people proposing this increase were themselves going to get the salary increase, and that's what I think. So they had a financial stake in it. So as a city council, we have to rely on people giving us their objective advice.
So who was proposing and who was going to receive?
Well, city management was proposing it. The city manager, the director of human resources, and they were among the people who were going to get the increases.
So what should have been done?
Well, what should have been done is it should have been disclosed.
The conflict should have been disclosed.
And I should say, under the law, nothing illegal happened because under the law, you're allowed to have this kind of situation. But I always told my law students, it's not about just what's legal, but what's ethical, which means the law is just a floor, not a ceiling to ethical behavior. So what you should have done is say, hey, we're proposing this agreement, but we're going to let you know there is an ethical conflict here, there is a financial conflict. You can still approve it or not, but know that, and the public should know that to make an informed decision.
So it was not in the documents?
There was no explicit disclosure. If you read the documents carefully and you were a sleuth, you could figure it out.
Right.
But I really think you should have something more explicit saying, note to the public, there's an ethical conflict here. And I think that's something where I, as city attorney, would lay that out for everyone to see.
So did you bring this conflict up? Because you, as someone on the dais, could say something.
I did. So I did bring up this conflict, and I also disclosed the transparency of the increases. So I did as a council member.
Right.
But, you know, a part-time council, we shouldn't leave it to them to figure this out and to lay it out for people. We should have staff, including the city attorney, say, here's the situation, you city council and you public, make whatever decision you want. So I think that's a real big issue.
Why does it seem so difficult? I mean, what you're describing seems so basic, and yet why is it so difficult that we can't have this occur?
Well, like I said, sometimes people say, well, here's what the law requires, and because there's no conflict under Government Code 1090 or whatever it is, we're not. Well, you know what? You need a higher standard. What's the right thing to do? And if this raise is a good public policy decision, you should have no problem disclosing it transparently, disclosing the conflicts, and then the council can vote for the raise. So I think, unless you have something to hide, why hide anything? That's my real point.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think in the future we need to change the way the city of Long Beach does business. I think we need. Well, I think the city attorney should go ahead and disclose to the council explicitly these potential conflicts, even if not legally required. I think every contract, like we have done in the past, should lay out the terms explicitly, including what the exact percentage increase is.
So no
legalese,
no legal mumbo jumbo, just in plain English.
Exactly. What is the percent increase? If it's 15%, right, 15%. If it's 15% minus 6%, write that. But I think to put in some mumbo jumbo about we're having a pension, there's a pension equivalent compensation, blah blah blah. People don't understand that. So I think once again, if you're proud of a decision, to go ahead and lay it out for the people to decide. That's what democracy is all about.
Should there be actual regulations on this or a new ordinance?
Well, that's something I've thought about, Brad.
Right.
But sometimes you have to ask the question: do we need more rules, or do we need to have just better judgment? And I think sometimes you can't legislate everything. You need to have officials who basically do the right thing.
His name is James Johnson. He is a member of the Long Beach City Council. He's a candidate for city attorney. That election will be held in April 2014. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.